Real quickly here before we transition over to our college football first look segment, this upcoming weekend is Super Contest weekend out in Las Vegas. If you want to sign up for the Super Contest or the Circa Million or the Golden Nugget Ultimate Football Challenge or the William Hill Pick'em out in Las Vegas, Vegas Matty over at footballcontest.com is your guy. Him and Tony do a phenomenal job. They've been our proxies here at Bang the Book for the Super Contest and the Golden Nugget over the last several years. Looking forward to getting together with them here again for those contest entries this season. Once again, Vegas Matty over at footballcontest.com. If you live outside of the state of Nevada and don't have access to using the Super Contest app or the Westgate app, which you'd be able to access inside the borders of Nevada, then you have to have a proxy to participate in those contests. And Vegas Matty over at footballcontest.com is your guy. We got one guest here for this first full edition of Bang the Book Radio for this season. That is Kyle Hunter of HunterSportsPicks.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
It's going well, man. It's good to talk to you again. Nice to hear from you and be able to talk some college football.
Yeah, man, it's been a long time. It was a long summer. We tried to connect a little bit and do some conference breakdowns and things of that sort. Unfortunately, we just weren't able to make it work with our schedules. How'd your summer go, brother? Did you have a good time?
Yeah, I can't complain. I've had a nice summer. Been able to spend some time with the family. Get some projects that I'm working on work-wise. Put in some extra time for college football. I was disappointed in my college football season last year. College football is a very strong sport for myself, and to finish a little bit underwater in college football last year, I've spent even more time prepping for college football this year. Hope to have a better season NFL-wise. Had a good season last year and hope to be able to keep that going. But you need a little bit of time to clear the mind there, especially in June. When it's about the lightest period for sports. So it was nice to be able to get that, but now I'm excited for football as well.
Well, that's the thing, too. We've kind of talked about this a little bit, and not most of the guests, but some of the guests that I had on over the summertime, they don't handicap baseball. And I know that you handicap baseball. It's been an up-and-down season for you. It was a very down season for me, which was quite frustrating. But that makes it hard, too. Handicapping baseball, you do so much with college basketball that, your basketball season goes deep into the month of April pretty much. So you do need a little bit of time to decompress. And the hard part is, and we've talked about this before, the timelines for college football are so accelerated now. With season win totals out so early, games of the year out so early, it can be frustrating, but also you don't want to speed through the process because the more you try to get done in a short period of time, the more likely you are to miss things. So while it's frustrating that maybe you didn't tap into the season win total numbers at the time that you wanted to, you got to make sure that you're doing all your due diligence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, as I look back at these season win totals now, especially some of them that opened in New Jersey, some of those numbers are just ridiculous. I wish that I could just set everything else aside, when you get to April and May and just look at college football. As somebody who handicaps baseball, I don't want to just totally set aside my baseball because that's a big time that I'm trying to understand what's going on in baseball, like you said, because college basketball goes deep into April as well. So, if you could just handicap college football or just football in general, it would give you an advantage, certainly. And I think that, while I do like to try to get early in the number as far as, week to week in college football, it's hard for me to get that first season win total because even if I look at those numbers and have a gut feeling on that, I don't like firing and putting quite a bit of money on things that I haven't really researched thoroughly, kind of like you said. So I like to be early, but I don't want to do it without the due diligence necessary.
All right, so let's talk about that a little bit here, and let's talk about what your process is like over the summer. And I think this works really well because you and I have a fairly similar process. What is it that you're doing? What is it? Power ratings? Are you just, are you doing something different? How do you get all of that preseason research set up to the point where you feel like you can fire on these season win totals and also on these week one numbers?
So the first thing I do is I go through and look at the new coaching changes. I try to make notes on, head coach changes to start with and assistants. It's something where, I think that the most value that you're going to find in betting is to find new head coaches or assistant coaches. And I would say assistant coaches are probably even better value because everybody knows about the head coaching changes. But, I go through and I make extensive notes about the coaching changes, whether I think it's an upgrade or a downgrade. And then I go into the power ratings. As I said to you here a few days ago, I did my power ratings a little bit different this year. Usually I save my regression analysis from last year for after I'm done with my first rating of teams for the upcoming season. Basically what I did this year is I decided that I went through all the teams, looked at regression, what kind of stats, just should not be there again, and kind of allowed myself to have a bit of a view of where I might want to be a little higher on a team or lower on a team instead of thinking that maybe blocking that out is the best. Part of the reason I did that is because I didn't do well on sides here the last couple seasons in college football. I do well on totals, and the sides hold me back. So I feel like I should do something a little bit different. I also feel like, I get behind the eight ball a little bit, and I don't want to feel like I'm having to adjust big time in the first couple weeks. So I wanted to go ahead and try to push what's something that I might not have pushed here in the past. So I've done it a little bit differently. Still have the ratings the same way that I do, 15 points is a max for quarterback, 15 for coaching. And I've tried to pay more attention to the coaching power ratings than I have in the past, too. I think that assistance is where the best edges will come here as well. So, the coaching staff in general is what you're rating here, not the head coaches. But I've made some differences from last year based on just, feeling like I can do better in college football.
All right, so I guess my follow-up question would be, when you talk about regression analysis, what sorts of statistics are you specifically looking at?
You're talking about turnover margin. That's a top one. I'm also looking at red zone statistics. I mean, some teams can be so ridiculously good in the red zone one year that you think you should probably take unders the next year or you should go against them. And obviously the inverse is true as well. I think that if you see things that just really stand out as, a team went into the red zone 40 times and they scored 35 touchdowns and, kicked 4 field goals and turned it over once. I mean, they're not going to be able to do that again. Certain teams, triple option teams like that, are going to do better in the red zone than other teams because they're used to just running the ball up and down the field. Teams who spread it out can sometimes struggle in the red zone because there's not as much space. But, certainly red zone is another area where I would look for it. I think that turnover margin is the spot I would always start. Sack margin is also something I look at. Sack margin is not necessarily going to regress, but you want to see who's coming back and who's not. If you lost your offensive line that was really good, or lost the pass rusher that was excellent, then you could think they're not going to be able to finish plus 20 in sack margin again, things like that. So try to look for another one is third down conversions also. I forgot about that one. I would say third down conversions is also a big one because you can see some pretty, really high third down percentages, 50% or higher. I know Boise State was a team that stood out to me when I was doing regression analysis from last year. Boise State just racking up first down conversions on third down, one after another. And, at some point you're not going to convert on 53% of your third down conversions like they did last year. Another one was Cincinnati. Cincinnati, a team that I like, but a team that I didn't want to be too high on going into this season because Bill Connolly put together some excellent work there on Cincinnati and what they did on third down last year. And it wasn't just what they did on third down, it's what they did on third down long. You're not going to keep converting those at that high of a rate long term. So those are the types of regression numbers that I look at.
Now, to sort of tie some of this stuff together a little bit, you were talking about assistants. And by assistants, I assume you primarily mean coordinators. So when you're looking for regression analysis when you're looking for regression in terms of red zone performance, are you just looking at it relative to the mean, or are you also factoring in that, hey, maybe this team was 85% touchdowns in the red zone and they've got a new offensive coordinator. So they're going to have a new guy calling plays because a lot of times it's about talent, it's about scheme, it's about finding the mismatch and having the right quarterback, but it's also about having the right play caller in the red zone. So are you factoring that into the equation as well, or are you just looking at it relative to the mean scoring percentage in the red zone?
I think you have to do both. I think that you want to look at the mean, but you also want to look at, case-by-case basis because, like you said, if you're having an excellent play caller that's doing everything right for multiple years in a row and you get a new guy coming in there that you don't really know about, you would definitely expect regression to the mean even more then, because you would think that guy would have a hard time being as good as the previous guy. So I think that you need to look at the mean, but you also need to look at a case-by-case basis as far as who was there before, who's there now. Do you think it will improve or get worse? And obviously you don't know the answers for all things like this. This is all predictive, but, once we start getting some stats for the early on, you can see if you think that maybe you were right or wrong, but also obviously don't want to look too much at a short sample size. So it's, you try to find a happy medium there.
One other thing I want to touch on with regards to this regression analysis point, and obviously I think it's very interesting because a lot of my baseball handicapping has been done based on regression analysis, and I'm kind of finding that maybe when it comes to baseball, that may not be the right way to do it anymore. But what I wanted to ask here is that, so you did it before you did your power ratings this year. Did you notice a difference maybe in how you would have rated a team previously compared to how you rated them for this year?
Yeah, I found myself, remembering the stats, seeing the stats that I put down. Obviously, I'm putting these all in my notes and saying, how is this team going to score that many times in the red zone again like they did last season? And so I'm trying to push, my edge on that specific team a little bit more, finding it in more of a positive light than I might have before. I really don't think it's going to make a significant difference, because I don't want to go and just put somebody 5 or 6 points higher just based on that. I don't want to overreact, but at the same time, like I said, I felt like I was needing to adjust too much in week 1, 2, 3, in previous seasons. And, then sitting there thinking in week 2 or 3, like we've said, that sometimes overreaction can really be a good thing to play against. But at the same time, I felt like I needed to react. So it leaves me in kind of a difficult situation. So I'm trying to, when I see that regression analysis, something that really stands out to me, Texas is a good team to point out for me. Like, Texas was negative yards per play margin. That's a team that I took the season win total under on, because everything will have to go right for Texas to get more than 9 wins this year. To me, if you look at their profile from last season, that's a team that I would have rated higher had I not looked at regression analysis before. So, bump them down a little bit more, because, they're Texas. They have great recruits, Tom Herman, a good head coach. But once you look at those numbers, you say, man, maybe they're not as good as I thought they would be. So I think that would be a good example.
Now, whether it was regression analysis or maybe something you found from a coaching standpoint, you mentioned Texas under as a win total play that you're already looking at. What are some other win total plays that you've already made, or that maybe you're considering based on some of these factors?
Yeah, I went ahead and said Texas, which is one of them I put in my notes. So I thought it was a good example based on regression analysis. I will say also about Texas here real quick. I think that Sam Ehlinger is a good quarterback, but if you watch the tape, he runs a lot. He scrambles when they might be able to get a passing play still. He's not a great runner. I mean, he's a good runner, but I think he might run a little bit too much. And also, Herman has to prove himself as a favorite. Everybody knows the stats about Tom Herman as an underdog, but he's not very good as a favorite. Texas is going to be favored a decent amount of times this year, and I think the Big 12 is a pretty deep conference. Some spots where you have good head coaches or improvement in coaches from past seasons. I think Big 12 is not, loaded with great teams or anything, but there's not as many teams at the bottom as there are in some of the other conferences. So I think Texas under is a good play. I know it was 9.5 for a good while. I got under 9 plus 100 for most of my play there. So I think 9 is pretty much the top for Texas. We'll see. But another Big 12 team, Oklahoma State over 7. Love the hire of Sean Gleason as offensive coordinator. Spencer Sanders, Drew Brown, I think they're really good fits for this system. Tried to watch some of the tape from Sean Gleason and what he called in the past. It's kind of hard to find too much information on things like that. But, a lot of motion, a lot of runs from the quarterback, some very unique, innovative looks. I think that he'll do really well there at Oklahoma State. And Mike Gundy's a guy that overperforms almost every single year. You look at his ATS record over the last 10 years, he's done tremendous. So I think that, Gundy, people like to talk about his hair, but we should also remember that Gundy is also a really good football coach.
Oh, Mike Gundy and the magic mullet. It's funny. I actually wrote up the Big 12 conference over at BangTheBook.com from a season win total preview standpoint. Texas under was one of mine as well, under 9.5 minus 150, which For those that are out there looking around at the season win total market, in a really simplified sense, every 10 cents of juice off of the standard minus 110 accounts for 0.1 wins. So if you've got a 9.5 minus 150, that essentially means about 9.1 would be the season win total number there based on what the line is telling you. Again, it's very oversimplified. The actual math is not exactly 0.1 wins, but it's relatively close. My personal numbers had Texas with 8.62 wins, so that's why I was looking at the under there in that one. But I think it's important to point that out because some of these do have a lot of juice on them. And some people don't really want to lay a lot of juice, but when you consider that every 10 cents is worth about a tenth of a win, then maybe you're a little bit more likely to put juice into the equation there. But in looking at Oklahoma State specifically, that was the thing. I mean, there was 7. I think there was 6s out there heavily juiced to the over, then 6.5. A lot of places out there 7.5 now. That's the thing is you sort of have to wonder, new quarterback, new offensive coordinator, do they gel together? And in some respects, it may be better with a new offensive coordinator to not have a third or fourth year starter out there who has to completely change everything. It's more of a blank slate for Oklahoma State here going into the season. So that's always an interesting thing that you have to try to figure out as you're researching these teams going into the year. How will all of these parts come together and gel? Personally, I have Oklahoma State around 7.13 wins, so I'm not as high on them as you are, but it is one of those really interesting things of you've got a smart head coach and you've got a blank slate on the offensive side now, which it's not just a blank slate for us, it's a blank slate for the teams that they're going to play because they don't know how to prepare yet.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there are more question marks around Oklahoma State than some other teams, but I think that Gleason's a good hire, and I think Mike Gundy gets his guys to play hard every single week. I also think that Oklahoma State's schedule sets up pretty well. Certainly, I wish I had over 6 or over 6.5, no doubt about that. I will say a couple more that I like. I like Indiana under 6.5. I find it hard to see more than 6 wins for this Indiana team. I think Indiana's a 5-7 or 6-6 type team this year. They get a couple easy wins there off the bat with Ball State, Eastern Illinois, and getting UConn at home, certainly another win. They do have to play Ohio State at home and Michigan at home. You don't get easy wins there. You want to be able to try to win your games at home if you're Indiana. Ohio State and Michigan both at home is a difficult draw. You have to go to Penn State at Purdue at the end of the season. A lot of times we see that Indiana and Purdue game at the end of the season trying to decide who will make it to a bowl game and who won't, and I think there's a good chance that will be the same again this year. One other that I wanted to point out here real quick, I like App State over the season win total. I actually read your article about the Sun Belt, and I saw you liked this one as well, so I thought I'd bring this one up. App State has a lot more question marks, or a lot less question marks than every other team in the Sun Belt. I find the rest of the Sun Belt just has something that's a kind of a glaring weakness, and you look at the App State team. Obviously, coaching changes, but I mean, I think this team is set up. This App State team has a really good quarterback, very good defense. I just don't see how they're going to lose very many games there with the schedule that they play. So I also like Indiana under and App State over.
Yeah, now in my power ratings, which I posted this morning over at BangTheBook.com, I have a link to my Google Sheet where I've got all of my season win total numbers. And in fact, I noticed that there's a hiccup somewhere in the formula. I actually have Appalachian State for more like 10.2 wins. In the list of teams, it has them down for 8.65. So I'm going to have to look into that here after the show. I noticed that there's a few that are kind of thrown off a little bit here on skewed a way that they shouldn't be. But, for Appalachian State, I mean, look, new head coach, sure. But when you talk about them from a talent standpoint in the Sun Belt and also with the way that schedule sets up, definitely a lot of reasons to like a team like Appalachian State. Probably will be a team that I mentioned here this week when I write up my top season win total plays in an article over at BangTheBook.com. And, for Indiana, that's an interesting one, too. I've got them with about 6.2 wins, but Rutgers is the only gimme game in the east side of the Big Ten. And I think Rutgers will be a little bit better this year than they have been in previous years, but that's the only gimme game you get. So, yeah, the non-conference schedule is fine. But you have to look at the schedule analysis and see, exactly how many upsets they have to pull off. How many coin flip games do they have to win? And I tend to agree with you that, Indiana looks like it could be a little bit of a more challenging season for them here as we go forward. But one thing I did want to ask you about here, with regards to season win totals and looking at these teams overall and everything, how much do you factor that schedule into the equation? I mean, is that really the primary selling point for you?
Well, I mean, I like to look for teams that I think are underrated and overrated. And I know we're going to mention some of these teams here coming up, and obviously there's quite a bit of correlation between teams that you think are underrated or overrated as far as what you like on season win totals. But there are some times that you just look at a schedule and you say, I think I like the over here. And one that I will point out from that, Missouri. You look at Missouri, I ended up taking over 8 minus 140. I don't know that I like Missouri that much as a team. ATS-wise, I don't know that they'll be tremendous. But you look at their schedule, and it's really hard to find them getting anything less than 8 wins. Just a very, very weak schedule, the weakest schedule you could get for an SEC team, in my opinion. So, sometimes the schedule means more than others to me. Obviously, you have to see who they're going to play because, there's other teams that, they play a very tough schedule, and I would have liked to take a season win total over with them. A team like Tulane stands out to me. I like Tulane. I love their defensive front. I think they have a really good coaching staff. I looked at the schedule and I thought, man, are they going to get to that win total? I mean, I like them ATS. I don't know if I can take over the win total, especially with the juice that it had. So certainly the schedule means quite a bit. It's not everything, but in some cases, it does warrant a play just based on the schedule.
All right, so let's touch on that overrated and underrated thing because I think that's really important. And something I wanted to talk about here before we dive fully into listing teams is that you and I are in different spots. While we tend to prepare for the season in the same way, I'm a writer for BangTheBook.com. You're a professional handicapper that sells picks. So in terms of having more aggressive positions on some of these teams, technically speaking, I probably have a little bit more leeway because people aren't buying my picks. There's no obligation to play what I tell you to play or what I suggest to play. When it comes to buying picks, you obviously have to follow through with them. Otherwise, there's no point in purchasing them. So you mentioned that maybe you've been a little bit more aggressive with teams, doing that regression analysis first and then setting up the power ratings. How do you walk that fine line of wanting to take some positions, wanting to be off of what the market has a little bit, but also realizing that if you're off from the market and you're wrong, it could really hurt clients early in the year?
Right, absolutely. I think that's a really good point and a great discussion point. I think that if you see it that way, you lose once or twice with the team. I'm very hesitant to keep backing that team. And sometimes, I can end up kicking myself and say, wow, I was actually right about this team, and I stayed away after a couple losses. But, it gets really hard for clients to bet on the same team multiple times and keep losing ATS. Even the same way with unders or overs. If you take a team over the total multiple times in a row, it keeps going under. Sometimes I have to go against what I really feel like I should be doing just because, I can respect the fact that a client would have a hard time, betting the same team multiple times in a row and losing every time. So usually it makes me stay away from that team a little bit more. I will say that, I want to have strong positions where I feel differently than what the market thinks. But at the same time, you have to respect the fact that the market's really good at this. The odds makers are not sitting back there and just, going based off what's there from last year. I mean, they're putting in all the research that you are as well, and more usually. So you got to keep in mind that you don't want to be off the odds makers too often. But, like you said, for me, I have to be off them some of the time because I have to have something to play. And sometimes that can be difficult in certain sports for me because I don't want to play very many games because, I just don't feel like my edge is enough. Sometimes I have to push my edge a bit just because, people want picks. College football, that's usually less the case than other sports because college football comes around once a week. You have some weekday games, things like that. But, having a bigger card in college football is easier because there's a lot of under-the-radar games. So I hope I answered the question properly there.
No, I mean, I think it is a fine line to walk because, you want to be close to the numbers that are out there because it would imply that your set of power ratings is pretty efficient. But also at the same time, you want to take some positions. And this is something that we'll be able to talk about here, once week one is in the books, and going from week 1 to week 2, some substantial adjustments get made. Going from week 2 to week 3, it's the same thing. And at that point, you have to decide how deep you want to dig your heels in to those preseason positions that you've taken, because one game of sample size shouldn't skew, multiple hours of research. But at the same time, if you don't make an adjustment, you could be 0-2 or 0-3 on that team in the blink of an eye. So that's the hard thing about college football, especially because, at the pro level, we know what we're going to get more often than not. The talent gaps are small. All of these players are good. All of these coaches, at least in theory, are world-class types of dudes. In college football, your gap between your number 1 team and your number 130 team is probably about 50 or so points. There's big coaching differences at the coordinator level and the head coaching level. It's just a much higher variance environment with college football. And I think that balance is kind of tough.
Oh, it's certainly tough. You have every sport you have that, but I think, like you said, college football, it's even tougher than some of the others because there can be some big changes from year to year. These are not even that close to the same teams that they were last year in a lot of cases. And you see a lot of coaching movement. But the market's good at this, and you want to have some edges to bet. And I still feel like totals is the market where I can take advantage of edges a lot better than on sides. But, when I get better at sides, I think I can for sure. I've been better in past years than I have the last couple of years. So I want to change things up a bit. And like I said, you do have to be understanding of the fact that, if you're sending out a pick, if you're a pick seller like myself, if you want to send a play on, say Ohio State 3 times in a row and they fail to cover ATS those 3 times, it's going to be hard to keep just pushing Ohio State and saying, you're going to get some messages saying, what's going on here? In my case, I would get a lot of messages saying you're a homer, which usually I don't bet on Ohio State games at all. But, just as an example, it's difficult to have a client continue making a play that is losing time and time again. So sometimes you might have to lay off of some of the edges you have. And like you said there, this is a very delicate balance in college football, trying to understand who you think is underrated or overrated, because the market's going to be adjusting too. So you're not the only one that's adjusting. So then you try to figure out how much am I adjusting versus what the market's adjusting.
It's interesting, man. And I think that's why we love college football and really college basketball so much too, because those are the 2 leagues that provide the most opportunities, largely because of the number of teams, right, but also because of the, as inefficient as we can say this market is, it is still pretty efficient, especially as you get later on in the year. If your power ratings are 4, 5, 6 points off in week 10 or week 11, that's a problem. This market does stabilize itself very, very quickly, and it has to, because we're talking about a sample size of 12 regular season games for these college football teams. So, one game is 1/12 of, the data points that you're going to get for the regular season. So it's forced to stabilize quickly. And that's why we sometimes get, that 2-touchdown favorite that loses by 20, because, the market may be correct, but it's just a higher variance environment. So I love college football. I love the chaos of it, but I also love the opportunities that are created by doing as much research as people like you and I do. So last thing I'll ask you about here, and then we'll start to look at some specific games for this weekend and kind of talk about week 1 a little bit. How confident are you right now with, 5 days until these week 0 games, about a week and a half until week 1 gets underway? How confident are you right now, and how much will you be doing over the next 9 or 10 days to get ready?
Oh, I'll definitely be still doing a lot of work. There's never enough time in the day for me. I feel like this is a job that never stops, and that's why it's always nice to have, whether it be a week off or an all-star break or whatever it is. It is nice to have some time off because I always want to put as much into this as I can, so I'm never going to stop. I feel confident. I do. I like where I'm sitting here. I think I found some teams that I think are underrated and overrated. I think I have some good edges on totals as far as coordinators and things like that, which we can talk about that sometime as well here. But, to me, I think that this is the time of the year where you should feel like, you're close to done, but at the same time, you're still working. If you just waste time in this industry and say, okay, I'm set, I'm good to go, you're going to get behind. You know, you got to try to keep working to get ahead and get ahead. So I'll also be looking for more edges. You know, I'm going through right now and looking at scheduling spots for the entire season. You know, I like to do that sometimes to try to look at spots that I think might be favorable for one team or another, or even a matchup that's good to bet an under or bet an over, so that then when we get to that week, I know that initially this was my lean. Has something changed based on that or not? You know, I kind of like to look ahead in that way as well.
Well, and that's something that's important too. And I was looking, and for those that are listening here, USA Today has a phenomenal college football injuries page now. I don't know who took it over. I don't know what's different about it. But the USA Today college football injuries page is exceptional. And it can be hard sometimes to find this information that's out there about injuries for, you know, power ratings adjustments and things like that. So far, that's the best resource I've found. So some tip for our listeners here on today's show. But at least there's that, man. I mean, selfishly, I'm glad that there are no injuries because I haven't had to make too many substantial adjustments. I wrote about the adjustments I did make in that power ratings article today over at BangTheBook.com. But, you know, no starting quarterbacks have gone down. Only, I think, UTEP's starting running back's the only one that's gone down. Not too many huge defensive injuries. So selfishly, I'm happy for that, so I don't have to adjust my power ratings too much. But also, we obviously want to see the best of the best and, you know, root for all of these student athletes to have healthy seasons. So that's been a good thing that, you know, whatever we did over the summer to prepare, we haven't had to throw it all out because of an injury yet.
Absolutely, and I think that this kind of ties into something we were talking about earlier. We were talking about power ratings. One thing I want to point out is that injuries are so common on the offensive and defensive line. If you start thinking that a team isn't deep enough on the offensive line or defensive line, that's a real problem. You know, that's something that is likely to bite them in the butt. You know, this is something where, you know, maybe you have 4 or 5 running backs and you only have one on the field at one time. First one goes down, the second one's pretty good as well. It's not too big of a drop-off. But, you know, if you're really weak on the offensive front, say you think they have good starters and nobody behind them, you got to downgrade a team a decent amount there because there are definitely going to be injuries. Like you said, I wish that there weren't, but you know it's going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. And it's important. We'll talk about this as the season goes along here, but, you know, we'll talk about how much of a quantifiable impact these injuries have. You know, some quarterbacks on some teams that just don't have depth, or maybe dual threat quarterback types, may be a touchdown plus to the line. You know, some running backs in college football can be a point and a half, maybe 2 points to the line, depending on how much they run the ball. In the NFL, it's unheard of for a running back to be a 2-point adjustment, you know, unless it's absolutely the most elite of the elite type of guy. Then you also want to factor in those cluster injuries, which is what Kyle was just alluding to in terms of offensive and defensive lines, linebackers, secondary, whatever. That's where you make your power ratings adjustments with those cluster injuries at the non-skill positions. So obviously we'll have injuries to talk about. They happen every year. Hopefully none as bad as like a Mackenzie Milton or, you know, anything like that, but we will be able to talk about those as this season goes along, to be sure. All right, so I think this is a good opportunity here with just 2 games in week 0. There are 2 FCS games as well. I'm sure Colgate will pitch a shutout against Villanova. But with just 2 games, we can talk a little bit here about the process, about what we're looking for, about how we handicap these games in deeper detail, because we're just going to have more and more games as the season goes along. We start with game 291-292, Florida and Miami, Florida, in Orlando, neutral site game. Kyle, these lines have been up since early June. So in terms of line equity, it's really hard to find any. I mean, if there was any, it's already been taken out of the number. We will start to see these move this week because limits increase. But how do you start breaking down a game like this at a neutral site?
Well, to me, you know, like you said, the line has been out there for a long time. The limits will go up. I think that some sharp bettors will not bet this really early on. It's somewhat similar to bowl games in that you're kind of afraid to, you know, bet a game 4 weeks before it's actually played because there could be suspensions or injuries. There could be a decent amount of those before the season sometimes as well. So, you know, I know some people don't like to put it down a huge investment, you know, months before the game's going to happen or weeks before the game's going to happen. So I think there will be public money and sharp money still coming in this week here on a game like this. You know, it's something where, as you look at this one, Miami versus Florida, you've got, like you said, a neutral site. First, I want to start with Miami. So I like the new head coach. I think it's a really good fit. Manny Diaz had the other position, comes down here. You can't really blame him. Obviously, it leaves the other school in a difficult situation. I think it was interesting that he named Jaron Williams the starting quarterback. I know it surprised quite a few people. I think this could end up being a good move, though. He starts a youngster with a high upside right away. Doesn't kind of go with somebody that you assume would get the position. Dan Enos, offensive coordinator, says he wants his scheme on offense to look complex but be simple. Look, that's what most people say. So, I don't know if you can get too much out of that quote. But he says he's willing to adapt to personnel, which is certainly a good thing. I don't like offensive coordinators who just have one way of doing it. It's kind of like in basketball, college basketball. If you just want to play one way, but you don't have the team that fits that style, you're going to struggle. So definitely like people that are willing to play to their personnel. If you look at Miami on offense, there's a lot of questions about how they're going to do right from the beginning. They're obviously up against a good defense here in Florida. You got a Miami defense. Linebackers are just tremendous here. You're not going to find better linebackers than Miami hardly anywhere across the country. They were third in yards per play allowed last year. They won't be able to improve on that, but they were 23rd in yards per carry. I think Florida's going to try to run consistently here. I think that they know they can't throw it. I think there's still a lot of question marks about Franks as a quarterback. Is he actually that good? If you want to talk about regression analysis, Florida plus 12 in turnover margin last year. It's probably going to be hard to repeat. I would expect Florida to run a lot. Like I said, I think Miami will run a decent amount also with Williams in there, as a youngster in a huge game. My strongest lean in this game would be the under. I think it's hard to take a side in this game. I know I won't be taking a side. You want to lay the points here in a low-scoring game. Maybe I would lean toward laying the points in this game, but at the same time, I feel like there's enough question marks here, and knowing that Miami does have upside, that I'm afraid to lay those points. Would I really want to take the points here? Not that much. With Miami, I'd like to see them on the field before I bet them myself, unless I could get a lot better number than this. So to me, my slight lean here is the under. I think that this is an interesting matchup and one that we should learn something from go forward betting more than trying to be a hero and bet this one.
Yeah, and as we look around out there, you've got some 7 still, extra juice in the favorite role for Florida at -7. A lot of 7.5s out there now. That's kind of the prevailing number as we hit game week. Total for this one did take a step down with the Jaron Williams announcement. Went from about 50 to 47 or so. Now it's kind of hovering around 47.5. And for me, the starting point is to look at my power rating. It's to see, do I have any value based on how I rate these two teams? The answer is no. At a neutral site, I've got Florida -7.5. So that's step one for me. And you always want to do that early in the week because you want to try and get out in front of the line. Obviously, with a line that's been out since June, you're not really getting out in front of the line here for week 1, but still, that's the starting point for me. Then I want to start breaking down the handicap of this game, looking at the situational spot. Well, it's game 1. There is no situational spot. It's a neutral site game, no home field advantage. You start looking then at, what's the returning production look like? Dan Mullen, back with Florida again, second-year defensive coordinator in Todd Grantham. There's more stability to the Gators in this game with Franks, who's essentially a third-year starting quarterback, with a returning defensive coordinator, and a team that improved from 4 wins to 10 wins from 2017 to 2018. On the Miami side, you've got a lot of coaching experience here. Manny Diaz has never been a head coach, but he's back with the defense that he just coached. So this defense will not change at all. The question becomes, is Dan Enos the right guy for this offense? Former head coach at Central Michigan, offensive coordinator at a few different stops. Has he used a dual threat quarterback before? Do you trust him to make the right call going with Jaron Williams over the holdovers from last year and transfer Tate Martell? Is that the right call? That's what I don't know about this game. So if I had to play it, I would take Florida because you've got, a quarterback and a system that the players know a little bit better. You've got a little bit more certainty of what they're going to bring to the table. On the Miami side, yeah, the defense is good, but they lost top guys at each level here. Lost their top sack man, top tackler, top cover corner. They've lost some pretty substantial pieces of that defense. Now they reload, obviously, because they're Miami, but still, in game 1 against an improved Dan Mullen Florida offense, that concerns me a little bit. So if I had to play something here, I would take Florida. But again, it's basically right on my number. And like you said, laying a touchdown in a game with a total in the upper 40s is a tough thing to do. That's why this line is only a touchdown, because of the expectation of these two defenses playing well.
Exactly. That's why this line is a touchdown, because, it's hard to lay too many points with a low total. And every year you find people who say, well, it doesn't matter in this case. It always matters to be laying a lot of points with a low total, It's not to say that it can't win laying the points with a low total, but, it's harder because if you don't score as many points, it's going to be a lot harder to cover a big number. So the thing I would say, too, is Miami turned the ball over 26 times last year. So the big key here is, can Williams take care of the football? I mean, this is a Miami team that, the offense killed them last year. The defense was so good. Turnover margin -1, even though Miami forced a lot of turnovers. So, if they can take care of the football, they're going to be better this year. We remember how good they were a couple of years ago. They don't have a lot of the same players, but Miami recruits really well. Florida, I think there are some signs that they could be a bit overvalued. If you look at how they did covering the spread last year, very good ATS. Like I said, they're plus 12 turnover margin. This is a team that, I think Florida's a good team, certainly. I don't think Florida's a great team. So, while I think that there might be some reasons to think that Florida would be a team to fade at some point during the season, I don't want to fade them here.
Well, and another stat that I threw in my preview over at BangTheBook.com here last year, Florida 6.9 yards per play against FBS teams with a losing record, 5.6 yards per play against FBS teams with a winning record. Miami, of course, a team that had a winning record last year, although it wasn't pretty, but you would expect them to be pretty good here again this season. One thing I do want to ask you about real quickly with regards to the total, because I know that you're a totals guy at heart. I know you're working really hard on your sides this year. When it comes to totals, I know that obviously you're looking at tempo, you're looking at seconds between snaps, looking at number of plays run, all those types of things. Do you also factor into the equation to the same degree something like we just talked about? Jaron Williams is a dual threat guy. Will they take shots down the field? Probably not, which means a more vanilla offense, some option, some quarterback draws, stuff like that. That's going to keep the clock moving. So do you try to anticipate game flow as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you want to see if that team, even if they are going to score, how many plays is it going to take them to get there? Because a team like Army, Army can go down the entire field and use the whole quarter. I mean, it's a team that's been a good under team for so many years based on the fact that their defense has improved, and by the fact that not only do they play slow, but they don't take shots. They're getting 4 yards at a time and going down the entire field. I think that's more likely with a team like Miami here than what it would have been in the past. And the other thing you have to keep in mind, and this is something I think a lot of people don't look at enough, a team like Miami last year had some higher scoring games than what you would have thought in some cases, because they turned it over so much in their own end. They're giving their defense a really bad position to be in. So even though they were third in yards per play allowed, Miami had some games that were higher scoring because they had such bad quarterback play. They're putting their defense in really bad positions. So some of the stats don't always tell the story. Special teams are also really important based on field position, so that's something else you got to factor in. But I think tempo and efficiency is the most important, but like you said, there's more to it than just those things.
Well, Miami also ran a couple of picks back for a touchdown. They had some strip sixes and stuff like that as well. And those are things that can kind of run up the point totals to a degree also. With that, let's transition to the late game here. And you know what? I know that the NCAA has always taken a very public anti-gambling stance. But, man, does it feel like they threw us a bone, giving us a Hawaii late-night degenerate special in Week 0? How sweet is this with Arizona an 11-point road favorite?
Yeah, this is a nice one. I'm really looking forward to this game. Most people would say they're looking forward to Miami and Florida more. I'm looking forward to this game more because, number one, I like
because that's us. That's what we do. We're going to talk about the Sun Belt on every show.
Right. Of course, right. I mean, if you like the Sun Belt, then you probably like Hawaii degenerate specials as well, and we do. So, Hawaii with a really nice breakout season last year. Cole McDonald was really impressive when he was healthy. Played through some significant injuries that I don't think we'll talk about here too much. But Hawaii, a team that's going to shred some really bad secondaries this year. They had 74 plays of 20 yards or more last season, so a very explosive offense. Hawaii was -9 in turnover margin and -16 in sack margin last year. If they can get those numbers evened out this could be a really nice year for Hawaii. And this is a team that I looked at pretty hard for taking over on the season win total. They have a tough schedule. Hawaii's schedule is very difficult, so I haven't done that yet. I haven't decided for sure whether I'm going to take over or not, but that would be my lean, certainly. I think that, switching back to the offense that they're at now instead of trying to, totally change what Hawaii used to be there like they were 2 or 3 years ago, it really helped them a lot last year. To me, the question in this wager, though, would be, what is Arizona? What do you make of Kevin Sumlin? I think Arizona's a big wild card. I mean, do we even know if Kevin Sumlin's a good coach now? I mean, he went down to the SEC, did something different than what everybody else was doing down there, had success with it, at least for a little bit, and since then he hasn't been very good. The rest of the nation starts doing things similar to what he's done as far as on offense. Tate should be a lot better now that he's healthy. Arizona only scored a touchdown on 23 out of 45 trips into the red zone last year. You would expect that to improve. I think Arizona runs the ball more this year. Strength is the offensive line. They lack playmakers on the outside. To me, Hawaii, I think I know what they are. Arizona, I'm not sure what they are. So I'm curious what your take is here on this game.
Yeah, Cole McDonald, a scrotum full of blood last year. I mean, it sounds like a Slayer album or something, but it was actually the injury that he dealt with last season. And I give him credit, man. I accidentally tap myself every now and then bumping into something or whatever else. And like my buddy's dog jumped on me the other day and I was down for like 15 minutes. So Cole McDonald's far more of a man than I am. But, this is a really interesting game to me because I think these are both play-on teams, in my opinion. I like the idea of Kevin Sumlin in year 2. I like what they were forced to do last year. Khalil Tate was hurt. He couldn't run around. He ran for over 1,400 yards in 2017. He ran for less than 350 yards in 2018. So that hurt Arizona. He wasn't able to do something he's very good at. But what it forced them to do is develop Khalil Tate as a passer. And maybe the scheme did that a little bit too here with Noel Mazzoni, but he's a truer dual-threat quarterback now going into 2019 than he was going into 2018. So I do like that. As long as he's healthy and has his legs and can run around, I think he's a much more difficult player to defend. You also have J.J. Taylor. He rushed for over 1,400 yards last year, only scored 6 touchdowns, though, which gives you an idea of why Arizona struggled last season. But I think there are some things to really, really like about this team. In year 2 for Sumlin, the defense didn't improve a ton, but did go from 6 yards per play to 5.7 yards per play. So hopefully Marcel Yates keeps moving in the right direction here. 8 starters back on defense. They had 19 picks. They took off almost half a yard per carry. So I like a lot of the things Arizona did last year, but they didn't show up in the final record. And maybe a dual-threat guy in Khalil Tate this year can get it done. Now, that being said, on the other side, you have to love what Nick Rolovich is doing here with Hawaii. Cole McDonald looks legit. They didn't run the football well at all last year, but they threw it down everybody's throat. About a half yard better per play defensively. I think both of these teams are play-on teams. So what I'm kind of hoping for is that we get an Arizona 10 or 11-point win, something close to the number, something kind of boring from a betting standpoint, so that I can play on these two teams in weeks 2, 3, 4, as long as I'm able to do that, because I like both of them. Second-year defensive coordinator for Hawaii, that can't hurt. Not big losses on that side of the ball. 18 returning starters for them. 13-game regular season last year, plus a bowl game, so they got extra practices. I like both of these teams, and it makes it tough to bet this game in particular. I'll give you my thoughts on the pick after you have a rebuttal here. But I think these are both play-on teams for me. And what I don't want is I don't want Hawaii doing what they did last year. They won back-to-back games as a double-digit dog and then went 3-9 against the spread the rest of the way because perception outweighed reality for that team. I hope that doesn't happen here this year because I think we can make money against the spread on both of these teams.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I do, and I was still trying to recover there from the injury talk there from a few minutes ago. That was I wasn't expecting the day-to-day comments that you put in after that, but that was get some good humor here for a Monday. I have to say that, Hawaii's a team I want to be high on. Arizona's a team that I don't know. I think they have high upside, low floor. So to me, too much of an unknown on Arizona. I would lean Hawaii plus the points if I had to take anything in this game. Also slight lean to the over. I think Hawaii will continue to play fast, get explosive plays. Arizona's offense could be good here. I don't think I'll bet this game either. I'm curious, what did you give for Hawaii on home field advantage in this one?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, Hawaii's home field advantage for me was 2 points last year. And obviously that seems extremely low because you talk about the travel headaches of getting out there. There are a lot of logistics that go into making that trip out to Hawaii, but Hawaii just wasn't covering numbers and really wasn't even winning games at home. They were not doing well. What I do to calculate my home field advantage, I take a 3-year sample size at home against the spread and straight up. So that's what I do. We'll see how well it works out for me. It's the second year I'm doing it, so we'll see if my numbers are off here. But Hawaii, because of the success they had last year, went up from 2 points of home field advantage to 2.5. So I think they're getting it back to a certain degree, and Rolovich is kind of creating more of a culture there. So it does make sense that their home field advantage, it'll probably be the standard issue 3 next year for me if Hawaii is as good as I expect. But in week 0, I think it's fair to say that the home field advantage isn't nearly what it would be in the middle of the season, because you get to get out there early. I don't even know if classes have started yet for Arizona. Probably not. So you don't have to worry about that. So the home field advantage is definitely lower here for Hawaii than it would be if this was week 6 against, Utah State or Wyoming or somebody like that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. If I wanted to play devil's advocate here, I'd say that, I think the home field advantage for Hawaii in a game like this, though, should be higher than it would for a San Diego State, a team that's used to coming here all the time. So I think this is a tough one. I give them 3 points for home field advantage in this one. It's a unique spot. Sometimes I like to look and see, who does Arizona play after this? Well, they play Northern Arizona after this, so they have no reason to overlook this game. If they had a huge game in their next game, maybe you'd think, well, this is just a trip for fun. But it's also, like you said, it's hard to think that in the first game. I do think that, Arizona's not a team that's accustomed to going here, which is difficult. Hawaii has shown that they're starting to cover numbers at home a lot better here lately, I think because of the change in systems. And like you said, I think that this will probably be an HSA that needs to increase over time. But I think this is an interesting spot here because you don't have a team from their conference that's accustomed to coming out there, but you don't have any kind of difficult spot for Arizona either.
Yeah, I mean, as far as this game goes, I would lean with Hawaii plus the points, 11, 11.5, 12, whatever you're looking at. Personally, my number for this game is pretty much right on it. I have it 11.5. That's where I was in July, and I didn't adjust either one of these teams today. So I'm right on the market number, but it's one of those things where, as you mentioned, Hawaii shredded some bad defenses last year. And while Arizona improved, and while Hawaii is not really a Pac-12 caliber offense, Arizona still doesn't have a good defense. So the idea of laying double digits here with a suspect defense, going out to Hawaii, as you mentioned, with a team that didn't even make a bowl game last year, is a challenge for me. So if I had to play it, I would play Hawaii because of some of the situational things and because I do think Hawaii moves the football here. I don't know if Hawaii stops Arizona. That would be the problem with, really going in on this game. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the movement for these two games. And this is the last point I want to end the segment on here. I know we've gone a little bit long, but you and I typically do when we talk college football. From a market entry standpoint, these numbers have been up since June, right? So limits do increase this week. Syndicates will be releasing their plays, probably here on Tuesday. They'll start on Tuesday for the week 0 games, probably next Tuesday for the week 1 games, something like that. I'm curious to see the time frame in which these numbers move and in which directions they move. The Miami game did come down from 8.5 to 7 over the summer. The Hawaii game was as high as 13. It's come down to 11. There's probably not a whole lot of movement in these two games specifically, but in terms of looking ahead at week 1, or if you want to throw in some thoughts on week 0 here, Kyle, when do you think the market starts to move again?
Well, if I were to guess, I would guess that this Hawaii number gets a little bit bigger. I think if you like Hawaii, you don't want to take plus 11. I don't know what to think about the Florida and Miami game. I think that's a fair line. I don't see much movement in that line. Like I said, the under would be my lean, but at 47.5, I've got 47 on the total. So I'm not betting the under with half a point of an edge, obviously. So as far as other games, I don't know what to think. I think that most people bet the week that we're currently on. So I wouldn't expect any big movements for the Thursday, August 29th games until at least Monday of next week. So I would say probably next Monday, next Tuesday would be moving day for those games for next week.
Now, as far as you personally, and again, as we've already talked about, you've got clients to consider. So there's also that. That's what makes our situations a little bit different. I know you play openers too, but in terms of releasing plays to clients, you've got to wait for the market to settle in a little bit. What is your approach for market entry going to be here next week in week one, where we've got, 6 FBS games on Thursday, 8 or 9 on Friday? When do you think you'll start to enter the market on these games, or have you already?
Yeah, I've taken 2 plays so far here just in the last couple days. Kind of wish that I had released some earlier on. There were some really good values in the totals market. I didn't bet them myself, and I didn't release them. I always try to, as many times as I can, I want to bet them exactly when I send it to clients. I don't want to be dishonest in any way. This is an industry that has a bad name for many reasons. And kind of my goal all along has been, it's more important to me to be honest and transparent than it is to win. Obviously, everybody else wants me to win the most of anything, but, the people who realize that I'm a little bit different than most guys in the industry, that means the most to me. I will say that I felt like it would be a little bit dishonest to play a game weeks or months beforehand and release it knowing that thing was going to move 8 or 10 points. You got a total like Georgia Southern and LSU. I think that total was as high as 61 at one point. There's no way it was going to stay at 61. So, that was one that I waited on, hoping that it wouldn't drop before we got closer to, and of course it did. But, it's a difficult balancing act because I want to try to make sure that everybody can get that line. There's only a couple books that had it out for a long time. So played it around a little bit. I've made a couple plays already here. I would say that I will probably release some more plays here later this week for the games next weekend. We've got Chris, 5 Dimes, Bet Online, some of the Vegas shops, Westgate, Pinnacle is up. So, most people could get the line now, but I try to make sure that, the majority of my clients would have access to the line. So that's kind of something that's difficult. I think week 1 is probably, week 0, week 1 is probably the toughest time to know when to enter regarding that.
Well, and I guess the final point to leave off on here, and you will hear all of us on this show say this many, many times over. Make sure that you are set up at multiple places to shop around for the best price. Yeah. Whether it's in the offshore market, whether you're in Nevada where you can download all the apps, New Jersey where you can download all the apps, Pennsylvania where you can play on the apps, West Virginia where you've got some brick and mortars, New York, Mississippi. If it's legal in your state, try and set yourself up as well as you possibly can to be able to shop around for the best odds. You do not want to be stuck taking -7 when you can get -6.5 somewhere else. So, again, it's kind of handicapping 101, but it's never a bad thing to remind people, have multiple outs. And if you're in a state where you've got app betting for the brick and mortars, download every damn app you can. Have them funded, because every half point, every 5 cents of juice can increase your bottom line and really helps your break-even percentage. So that's a very, very important note to talk about here. Kyle, I don't know if there's anything to add, but if there is anything to add, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have to say that I think that while I hope that we've made several important points over the course of this hour, and like you said, we always go longer than what we think to start with, partially because you and I both love talking, whether it be college football, college basketball. And to be honest with me, I kind of just looked at the clock and said, wow, shit, I didn't realize it'd been that long. And it's just, I enjoy talking college football and I enjoy talking to you. It's been quite a while. But I think that while we've made several points that I hope that you would be considering, the most important point is what Adam just said there. The half point, the 1 point, so often I hear, I'd rather only keep my local, or I'd only have one offshore. It's okay. If I take a half point loss, it's barely ever going to happen. And then those are the same clients that later, instead of winning, they pushed or they lost. they come back later and they say, damn it, I wish I had, I needed it. It's just before the season, understand that is going to happen multiple times. The odds makers are good at setting these lines. There's going to be a lot of games that fall very close to, whatever that line is at. So definitely shop around, have plenty of outs. It's a very, very important in this business.
Absolutely, and I promise you we will talk more about bankroll management here both this week and next week on Bang the Book Radio, and we'll keep talking about it as we go throughout the season here. A very important topic to drive home, to be sure. Kyle Hunter of HunterSportsPicks.com. What's going on over at the website right now, man?
Well, check out the free picks newsletter if you haven't already over there at HunterSportsPicks.com. 78 and 46 in my last 124 free picks. Those go out weekly, usually twice a week once NFL starts. I'll send one for college football, then one for NFL. So those will be coming out again very soon here. Looking forward to that. Not sure if I'll send one out here for this week 0. I don't want to push something that I don't like. But if you're looking for premium plays, I'm doing a special for Bang the Book listeners, $725 for every college football play and every NFL play I make all the way through the Super Bowl. So you don't pay anything extra for bowl games. You don't pay anything extra for the playoffs or anything. If you want that special, shoot me a message, Kyle at HunterSportsPicks.com, or send me a message on Twitter at KyleHunterPicks.
Yep, there you go. At Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter, Kyle at HunterSportsPicks.com via email, and Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. Phenomenal. Great stuff, man. Always good to chat with you. Thank you so much for talking with me, buddy. And you know what, man? I'm looking forward to it. I know you're going to do some video content for us this year over at Bang the Book on our YouTube page. You and I are probably going to collaborate on some stuff once we get everything squared away and situated. So should be a hell of a lot of fun, man. It always is. This hour has been, and we got plenty more hours to go here for the football and the basketball season. So thank you so much, brother, and I'll talk to you again next week.
Hey, thanks a lot, man. I always enjoy it. Looking forward to it.